Hey, it's Ben here. Today, I want to talk to you about my experience in trying to design a combat system for my game, Astorum. I've gone through like 4 different iterations so far, and I'm frustrated that I haven't hit onto something good yet. Maybe you've had a similar experience trying to come up with a feature or even a combat system of your own for your game. I'm going to walk through each of my attempts, talk about what I learned, what worked, what didn't. Let's do it. If you don't know what Astorum is, you're in good company. I'm still figuring it out. It's a mobile game where you build a little space empire and build up an economy and run your planets and build mines and harvest resources from gas giants. And you go and fight other people. It's a multiplayer game. But in order to go and fight other people, the game needs a combat system that is fun and works within the framework that's existing there. So my first attempt at a combat system for the game was very basic. I wasn't going fancy with graphics or anything. It was just try and make something that works. It was a turn-based party-style combat game. So there were ships, and those ships would have stats like power and hull and shield, and basically you take turns, each of your ships can attack, restore your own shields. Now the problem that came up with this was in Astorum, you are progressively developing your planets and your empire, so you get more and more resources over time. So if you have a combat system where you are setting up essentially a defense for each of your planets to protect your resources, but your resources keep getting bigger and bigger, then naturally, you're going to want to have your defenses getting larger and larger. So if you have individual ships that are like cards, how do you scale it? Kind of the lesson I took away from this was that not all styles of game will scale up. This one in particular, I tried a couple of different methods. Like I tried making the individual cards on each side of the field be able to stack, but then you get like the stats for that ship start scaling up. And the whole point of a game like that is that the numbers are small and they're manageable and you can do the calculations in your head. It's kind of like Hearthstone or Yu-Gi-Oh, you know, you can work out what the numbers are going to result in. But when you start scaling up to like, oh, I've got 100 ships in this spot, then your stats are like, oh, I've got 700 attack and 350 shield and this person has 1,000 numbers. So I didn't like that. I wanted to move away from that. I need to find something that will scale. This brings me to number 2, where I kind of went back to the roots of the idea of this game. Now, if you don't know, this is kind of inspired from an old PBBG that I used to play called O-Game. Same sort of concept, space empire building, but it was all text-based. And the way you did combat in that was you would just build a number of ships, 100 battleships and 2,000 light fighters and whatever. And then you would look at some planets around that you want to raid, work out their defenses, put all the numbers of ships and defensive structures into a simulator, and then work out your probability of success and how much you're going to lose and how much you're going to gain from beating them, and then choose whether or not to make the attack. I thought, okay, this is kind of the original juice of the game. Maybe I'll try something more like that, but augmented. I built a little simulation combat system. So I thought, all right, let's do some extra things, like let's be able to have some spatial positioning of the ships and different formations, like spearhead formations and ring formations. And you can set groups of ships to have these properties or be in these places, and then pit them against the other squad or the other set of defenses who have their own formations. And maybe you'd be able to come up with strategies to counter theirs. And what actually happened was, because this simulation style of combat has such low transparency, like you can't really see what's going on, you just put the numbers against each other and then look at the outcome. It was very hard to make strategies around it. And when you start adding more layers behind this opaque front of the simulation, like I did with the formations and the positioning, it just gets really confusing. Like it's already confusing. And then you add all these extra layers and you're like, how can I strategize when I don't know what's going on here? And I even tried just running the simulations with lots of different formations and ship types to see like which ones were good against each other. And I couldn't even build up any sort of intuition for what was going on. And I designed all the rules for it. So my takeaway from that was it's difficult to make strategies around systems that are very opaque. So if you're going to have those sort of systems like this simulation, keep it small. Don't add extra layers to this already hidden, mysterious thing. So I moved on from that. I thought, okay, let's go back to something more visual. So I drew up this hex grid and made some little physical ships to like move around on it, and I started thinking about moving squads around on the field, flanking other ships to get behind their shields, and like leaving traps on the field to defend your planet. So I started implementing a version of it in the game, and I just had this sort of hex battlefield floating around in space above your planet, so you could see your planet at the top, and you could plop fleets down and move them around, and you'd click them and there'd be little nice effects going on the tiles, and it was all pretty cool. I liked it visually, but when I did the pre-alpha test, where I had about 13 players jump in online and try out the game, no one really did it. By the end of it, I had to ask people to try out the combat just so I could get feedback on it. And the reason that that happened was because there was absolutely no synergy between the game that I made, the combat, and the rest of the game. People had no incentive to actually do it. There was a looting system where you can see how many resources the player has on that planet, and when you get your cargo ships across the field, which is kind of the aim of the game, you can capture those resources and bring them back. Everyone was just making so many resources off their mines alone. There was no reason to do the combat. And actually there ended up being this subtle cap on the amount of resources you could actually get from the combat, because what I didn't realize was because the cargo space of your ships stays the same, and because there's a limit on the number of ships you can build, the amount of cargo space essentially that you can realistically have available to capture resources stays reasonably static. Your fleet cap does go up a bit, but that means you can only capture a very small amount of resources compared to how much you could be getting from just running your mines and upgrading your mines. So no one wanted to do the combat. It was just expensive. They didn't get anything out of it. To be honest, the game itself was underdeveloped. Even if there was synergy, it needed a lot of work. It needed more traps. It needed more info from the game about how it would work. There wasn't really much feedback on what was going on. You did your little combat simulations between the fleets. If one of them died, it would like blow up, but you wouldn't really get a sense of how much damage you'd done. Like there was no feedback on the screen to say, oh, you did 100 damage, or like 3 of your ships just died. The numbers would change, but it wasn't very obvious. So like there was a lack of feedback there. There was a lack of synergy with the actual game itself. And to be honest, I felt like I was pushing the limits of what React Native was made for. I mean, it's kind of flexible, but it's not really designed for this style of thing. Like it's not a game engine. I felt like if I kept going this direction, I was also going to be really stretching what I'm doing with it. Like the code already looks a bit janky to get it to do this stuff. So all of those factors combined kind of made me want to move away from that. And I was like, oh, I know this is like my 3rd try at a combat system. Do I really want to come up with another one? So that brings me to combat system number 4. I didn't actually develop this one too far. I cut it off early, but what it is like another party turn-based combat system, but it was kind of based on dice. I was like, I love D&D, I love rolling dice, let's get people rolling dice in my game. So I went into Blender and I made some dice, and I dropped them down this simulated cylinder, and I put a camera at the bottom so you could see the dice plopping onto the screen and bouncing, and I made like nice sound effects and stuff for it. And then I just sat around playing with these dice. It's just what I do when I'm making games, apparently. Anyway, the game itself was going to be, you have these ships, kind of like the first version, where you have ships on the field. They don't stack into squads or anything, you just have ships. They have some stats. Those stats are used by rolling dice onto the field, and the dice roll determines the damage. You do damage to the other ship, does a little shake and the health goes down, and you proceed like this, attacking each other. And there were going to be different types of moves, kind of like Pokemon, where you'd have different attacks and like status effects you could put onto other ships, like a tactics style game. I was really enjoying it. The touches that I put into it, like the little shakes and the borders around the ships and the dice and stuff like that, made it all pretty fun to like press on stuff and move it around, and like that's good for game feel. But I got to the point where I was like, am I gonna design a whole tactics style, Pokemon style game where you can like level up your ships and then change your stats and then try and pick your moves and then balance a whole series of moves against other moves? And I was like, this is turning into a whole another game. And this combat is just a small part of a larger multiplayer game I'm making. And at that point I was like, whoa, this is like not at all in line with the goals of the project. I'm not putting this much time into this. I'm just one person. It's crazy. I'm not gonna do that. Lesson was, keep aligned with the goals of your project. You know, write those goals down as well so you can remember them and keep on track as you're working on it. I've tried all these different things. I've tried something similar to the game that inspired me. I've tried this party-style turn-based combat. I've tried a whole battlefield of hex tiles and moving ships around. I'm like, I'm going crazy here. So, I don't know, I'm kind of on number 5 now. All right, let's go back to basics. Let's just do a simple simulation-style combat, but let's change elements of the game around it. I wanted to address some of the issues I had with the original game, which was like needing to check your game all the time to check if people are attacking you and to spend your resources and have your fleets in motion so people can't attack you. So I'm thinking for this one, I'm gonna keep the actual combat similar, but make it more of an information game. You wanna know whether it's worth attacking someone, you wanna know if there's anyone with certain types of space stations in the area that can intercept your fleet if they have them. Really, most importantly, I wanna make it so you don't need to be checking it all the time. So what have I learned from all this? Number 1, not all games will scale up. Number 2, if you have systems with high opacity with all stuff hidden behind that the players can't see, keep it minimal. Don't add more layers behind that and expect the players to be able to strategize. Number 3, if you're trying to fit a feature into your system, make sure it has high synergy with the rest of your project. Make sure people have incentive to use it and know how to use it. Number 4, know the goals of your project and stay aligned with it. If something is too big in scope for what you're working on, identify that early and find something more appropriate. Extra learnings. If you have a particular toolkit you're working with, say React Native for me, make sure you keep your project within the bounds of what your tools can do. Know your tools. Finally, wish me luck. I'm gonna try and make this one work because I don't want to do a number 6, but I will because I'm gonna finish this thing. I'm gonna go do that. Thanks for watching and I'll catch you later.